Welcome to Lecture L2E of Computer Programming Fundamentals. Computer Programming Languages, the 1970s. The 1970s introduced the era of establishing computer programming languages best practices. Computer programming language best practices that was led by the acceptance of structured programming constructs. This then led to the migration from the computer programming language procedure-oriented paradigm to the computer programming language object-oriented paradigm. The 1970s established best practices for computer programming languages. Best practices that pervade the computer programming languages of today. Pascal started this trend by implementing structured programming constructs. Pascal was first introduced as a teaching tool for computer programming. Next, Forth demonstrated the property of extensibility. Forth was a computer programming language initially developed for mainframes. Forth was extended to provide firmware for today's microcontrollers. The C computer programming language, which was both a high-level and low-level computer programming language, a computer programming language that could be used to develop computer programming application solutions, as well as the development of computer operating systems. Smalltalk was developed at the Learning Research Group of Xerox's Palo Alto Research Corporation. Smalltalk became the first computer programming language to completely implement the computer programming language object-oriented paradigm. Prolog followed with the first computer programming language that was based on the computer programming language logic-oriented paradigm. SQL was developed to process the relational data model developed by E.F. Cobb. Thus, the 1970s said goodbye flat files and sequential processing, with hello relational databases and event processing, all based on structured programming best practices. Pascal is an influential imperative and procedural computer programming language. Developed in 1970 by Nicholas Wirth, Pascal is a small and efficient computer programming language intended to encourage computer programming best practices. Computer programming best practices based on structured programming constructs of sequence, repetition, and decision. A derivative known as Object Pascal, designed for the computer programming language object-oriented paradigm, was developed in 1985. Object Pascal demonstrated the evolution and extension of the Pascal computer programming language. Pascal is named in honor of the French mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal. Initially, Pascal was intended to teach students structured programming. What's more, Pascal has been used for everything from research projects to personal computer games and embedded systems. Pascal was the primary high-level computer programming language targeted for development on the early Apple Macintosh computer. In fact, parts of the original Macintosh operating system were hand-translated into Motorola 68000 assembly language from Pascal source code. Today, Object Pascal is used for developing Windows applications. Wirth's original intention for developing Pascal was to create an efficient computer programming language. An efficient computer programming language based on structured programming best practices. Pascal has its roots in the ALGOL 60 computer programming language. To improve on ALGOL 60, Wirth introduced concepts and mechanisms which enabled computer programmers to define their own complex structured data types. As a result, Pascal included complex data structures such as lists, trees, and graphs. In conclusion, Pascal started out as a computer programming language to teach structured programming best practices, but then was extended to become recognized as a formidable computer programming language based on the computer programming language object-oriented paradigm. Forth was developed by Charles H. Moore in 1970. Forth is an imperative stack-based computer programming language and development environment. Forth features include support for structured programming best practices, reflective computer programming, concatenative computer programming, and computer programming extensibility. What's more, Forth features both interactive execution of commands plus the ability to pre-compile commands for later execution. The Forth development environment combines the compiler with an interactive shell. This allows the user to interactively define and execute computer program code in a virtual machine environment. A virtual machine environment much like Java's virtual machine. As such, a subset or component of computer program code can be tested, redefined, and debugged. Because the component source code is entered without recompiling or restarting the entire computer program, this property made Forth popular on computers with limited resources. Computers such as the BBC Micro and the Apple II series. As I mentioned before, I used the Apple II for an MBA class focused on the utilization of computers to support small business. I still can remember the 8.5 floppy disks used to port computer programs. I first used Forth on a Burroughs B5500. It sure was a powerful computer programming language, especially Forth's power for processing linked list data structures. Forth today is used as firmware for microcontrollers. In conclusion, Forth's major contribution was the computer programming language's extensibility property. For example, originally developed for Burroughs mainframe computers, Forth has been extended to provide firmware for today's microcontrollers. C is a general-purpose computer programming language developed by Dennis Ritchie in 1972 at Bell Labs. C provides computer programming constructs that map efficiently to computer-machine instructions. As such, C was used to reprogram computer applications originally programmed in assembly language. Most notably, system software like computer operating systems. In fact, the operating system for the IBM 360 series of mainframe computers was reprogrammed from the assembly computer programming language to the C computer programming language. Also, early on, computer programming application packages, such as the Lotus spreadsheet package, were converted from the assembly computer programming language to the C computer programming language. No surprise, C is one of the most widely used computer programming languages of all time. In fact, there are very few computers for which a C compiler does not exist. What's more, C is used to develop general-purpose computer programming application solutions for a wide range of mainframes, mini-computers, and microcomputers. As such, I have chosen the C computer programming language as the computer programming language to demonstrate computer programming fundamentals for the computer programming language procedure-oriented paradigm. No surprise that many computer programming languages of today have borrowed computer programming language fundamental principles from the C computer programming language, namely computer programming languages such as C++, C#, Java, JavaScript, Perl, PHP, Python, and etc. C's most pervasive influence on these computer programming languages has been the syntax of the computer programming language's source code. That has been carried forward to the computer programming languages of today. For example, the same syntactical rules that originated in C have been preserved in Java, C#, and many others. So if you learn the syntactical rules for the C computer programming language, you don't have to relearn them for Java or the other major computer programming languages of today. This is why I chose the C computer programming language and the Java computer programming language to demonstrate computer programming fundamentals. where the C computer programming language demonstrates computer programming fundamentals for the computer programming language procedure-oriented paradigm, while the Java computer programming language demonstrates computer programming fundamentals for the computer programming language object-oriented paradigm. In conclusion, the C computer programming language arguably has had the greatest influence on the dominant computer programming languages of today. In fact, the C computer programming language is a computer programming language that is both used for high-level as well as low-level computer programming, high-level general-purpose computer application solutions, as well as low-level or machine-level system computer programs, such as operating systems. Smalltalk is an object-oriented, dynamically typed, reflective computer programming language. Smalltalk was originally developed in 1972 at the Learning Research Group of Xerox's Palo Alto Research Corporation, otherwise known as the LRG at Xerox's PARC. A large number of Smalltalk variants have been developed since 1972. The unqualified word Smalltalk refers to the Smalltalk 80 computer programming language. Smalltalk 80 was the first version to be made publicly available in 1980. Smalltalk was the product of research led by Alan Kay at PARC in 1972. Alan Kay designed most of the early Smalltalk versions. However, Dan Ingalls implemented the first version known as Smalltalk 71. Ingalls' early implementation was influenced by the Simula computer programming language. The idea of message passing, first implemented in Simula, became the foundation for event processing, where event processing led to the computer programming language object-oriented paradigm. No surprise, Smalltalk is often recognized as the father of object-oriented computer programming languages. Smalltalk 80 was the first computer programming language variant made available outside of PARC. Smalltalk 80 was first given to a small number of firms for industry peer review. After the peer review, Hewlett-Packard, Apple Computer, Tektronix, and Digital Equipment Corporation implemented Smalltalk 80 on their computer platforms. Smalltalk has greatly influenced today's object-oriented computer programming languages. First and foremost, event processing led to the migration from the computer programming language procedure-oriented paradigm to the computer programming language object-oriented paradigm. Secondly, the WIMP GUI, or Windows Icons Menu's pointer graphical user interface, improved human-computer interaction dramatically. Lastly, the establishment of an integrated development environment, or IDE, an IDE that utilized the WIMP GUI concept to create a rapid application visual computer programming development environment for the development of computer programming application solutions. All of this was inspired by Xerox's PARC through Smalltalk. Prolog is a general-purpose logic computer programming language associated with artificial intelligence and computational linguistics. Prolog has its roots in first-order logic. Unlike many other computer programming languages, the Prolog computer programming language is declarative. For example, the computer program logic is expressed in terms of relations declared as rules. As such, the computer program's processing is driven by the processing rules. In this way, Prolog is considered a declarative, rules-based computer programming language. The Prolog computer programming language was first conceived by Alain Colomer in Marseille, France in 1972. Prolog was one of the first computer programming languages to conform to the computer programming language logic-oriented paradigm. In fact, Prolog remains today as the most popular computer programming language that conforms to the computer programming logic-oriented paradigm. In fact, many free and commercial Prolog implementations are available. Initially, Prolog was aimed at natural language processing. However, Prolog has since been extended to provide computer programming application solutions for theorem proving, computer programming application solutions for expert systems, computer programming application solutions for games, computer programming application solutions for voice recognition, computer programming application solutions for control systems. Prolog today is also supported by a Visual Rapid Application Integrated Development Environment, much like Visual Studio.net and NetBeans, namely Visual Prolog. Having had past experience in providing enterprise application integration services, specifically for the healthcare industry, I can personally testify to the positive contribution that rule-based computer programming application solutions had on my enterprise application integration practice for integrating diverse computer programming application solutions, a rule-based driven computer programming approach first developed by the Prolog computer programming language. SQL, or Structured Query Language, is a special-purpose computer programming language designed for managing data in relational database management systems. SQL was the first computer programming language to implement Edgar F. Codd's relational database model in 1978. Codd's relational database model was developed in the late 1960s at IBM. Initially, SQL was developed as a purely declarative computer programming language. However, it has been extended to include procedural elements to provide structured programming constructs. SQL became a standard of the American National Standards Institute in 1986, followed by the International Organization for Standards in 1987. Since then, the standard has been extended significantly. SQL was initially developed at IBM by Donald D. Chamberlain and Raymond F. Boyce in the early 1970s. This initial version was called SQL, short for Structured English Query Language. SQL was designed to manipulate and retrieve data stored in IBM's original quasi-relational database management system called System R. System R was developed at IBM's San Jose Research Laboratory to implement Edgar F. Codd's relational database model. The acronym SQL was later changed to SQL in 1978. At the same time, in the late 1970s, Relational Software Inc., now Oracle Corporation, recognized the potential of the concepts described by Codd, Chamberlain, and Boyce. As such, Oracle developed their own SQL-based relational database management system. No surprise, to this day, there is a debate on who developed SQL. That debate centers on Oracle versus IBM. In June 1979, Relational Software Inc. introduced the first commercially available implementation of SQL. This first commercially SQL implementation was called Oracle version 2. Oracle version 2 was targeted for Digital Equipment Corporation's VAX series of computers. IBM, not to be left behind, began developing commercial products based on their System R prototype. Commercial products including IBM System 38, SQL DS, and DB2. Commercial products which were available in 1979, 1981, and 1983 respectively. Today, several dialects of SQL meet ANSI and ISO standards. Today, the leading SQL commercial relational database management system vendors include Oracle, Microsoft, and IBM.